The Relativity Fraud, established by trickery, maintained by propaganda. A simple exposure for laymen, by Bowden. In 1887, an experiment shattered the scientific community. Michelson and Morley tried to check the speed of the Earth through the ether as it orbited the Sun by passing light in two directions, one in the direction of the Earth's travel and one at right angles, and then comparing them for differences. They expected to measure a speed of about 30 kilometers per second. To their amazement, there was no movement of this order. They called it a null result. They actually measured 1 to 10 kilometers per second, but it was still called a null result. They rushed out the theory called the Fitzgerald-Lorentz contraction. This claimed that the tube in line with the direction of movement shortens as it moves through the ether. There was no evidence whatsoever for this. It was only a way of getting over the implication that the Earth was stationary. Later, in 1905 and 1915, Einstein produced his relativity theories, which overcame the troublesome Michelson-Morley experiment by simply abolishing the ether. The whole theory is riddled with contradictions and problems, which we will examine. Before we do so, we will examine a fundamental contradiction in the theory, which will arise several times in various subjects that we deal with. This is known as the clock, or twins paradox. It totally destroys the whole basis on which the theory is founded. Imagine a clock on the Earth and an identical one on a rocket. According to relativity, if the rocket goes into space and later returns, its clock will run slower than the Earth clock. However, as far as the person on the rocket is concerned, it is the Earth that is rushing away from the rocket. Acceleration is not accounted for in relativity, and according to relativity, the rocket can claim that it is the Earth that is moving. Now, if it is considered that the Earth is moving, then its clock will be slower than the rocket's clock. But a clock cannot be both slower and faster than another clock, which is a complete contradiction. So the clock paradox, which is inherent in the theory, actually destroys its validity. We will not set out the various claims and effects of relativity, but we will first look at 4 evidences said to support the theory. The experiment that was said to confirm relativity and made Einstein famous was the eclipse experiment of 1919. As starlight passes the Sun, it is slightly bent. Newton said it would be 0.9 arc seconds. Einstein said it would be twice that, 1.8 arc seconds. Check plates of 7 stars were taken at night and then compared with the same stars taken when the Sun was in eclipse, and the stars could be seen for a while as their light came past the Sun. But there are many problems with this experiment. Firstly, they used a mirror to reflect the light into a horizontal telescope. This introduced 3 times the error the direct use of a telescope gives. Secondly, the heat of the Sun on the mirror warps it and introduces further errors into the readings. Thirdly, as the cone of darkness crosses the Earth, it causes considerable turbulence in the atmosphere due to the change of temperature, which plays havoc with the star's images. Finally, the starlight comes in at an angle, and the Earth's atmosphere bends the starlight, which has to be corrected. But this correction is 100 times the minute angle change that they were looking for. Here are the results of plotting of 2 of the stars, and how chaotic they are can be seen. To be convincing, All the check star plots, they are the green crosses, should be close together, and the eclipse star plots, the red stars, should also be close together, but you can see how almost random they are. C. Will, although a convinced relativist, nevertheless admitted in an Einstein centenary survey in 1979 that these results were very meagre and would not have been accepted as proofs today. They were 1. Explicable by other means. The results were from half to twice the predicted value, and they had only 30% accuracy. Such a condemnation renders the eclipse results useless as a proof of relativity. Yet they were announced as convincing in 1919. An alternative explanation of the eclipse results. Professor Poor showed that a thin amount of matter around the Sun could account for the deflections, and we will be referring to this later when dealing with the precession of Mercury's perihelion. This was considered by the relativists, but was blankly dismissed by them. Why? It is perfectly possible for there to be a small amount of material around the Sun, but this was not the explanation they wanted. The flying clocks experiment. 4 atomic clocks were flown eastward and then westward. It was claimed that the results supported relativity. However, there is the same objection to the clock's paradox. In relativity, you cannot choose one clock as a standard. All clocks are the same relative to each other. Many clocks at different latitudes are moving at different speeds, but no differences due to this have ever been recorded. The paper indicates that there was a similar experiment carried out in 1970, but these do not seem to have been reported. As with the eclipse results, experiments are repeated until the required results can be massaged out of the chaotic readings. Essen, an expert, pointed out that not all the results had been used. If they had been included, then the results would become westbound 275 in theory, but reported was 205. The correct figure should have been 134, and the correct figure over the theoretical figure is only 0.49. In the eastbound, 40 was in theory, only 66 were reported, but the correct figure should have been 132. This gives a ratio of the correct figure over the theoretical figure of 3.3. As can be seen, the correct values are half and over 3 times the expected values. Hardly convincing proof. Haffley, one of the experimenters, admitted, "The difference between theory and measurement is disturbing." This was omitted from the report, which said the results were convincing qualitative results. Kelly examined the original papers and claimed that the clocks would have to be 100 times more accurate than they were to prove their case. Many corrections were applied, and one clock was corrected from 26 to 266 without any explanation. Clearly, this proof of relativity, like the eclipse experiment, is quite worthless, yet it is still paraded as convincing evidence. As with the eclipse results, the very small values needed to support relativity had to be massaged out of the wildly varying values recorded. Upon such thin evidence was relativity thrust upon the scientific world with a huge propaganda campaign that tried to intimidate any scientist that dared to oppose it. It was very successful, but not totally so. The precession of Mercury's perihelion. Mercury orbits the Sun in an elliptical orbit, and the long axis slowly rotates with each orbit. It rotates at 5,600 arc-seconds per century. But although astronomers could account for most of this rotation, there was a remaining 43 arc-seconds they could not account for. Einstein boasted that this unexplained 43 seconds of arc per century was explained by his theory, against which classical mechanics was powerless. Yet no less than 4 classical explanations were provided. Charles Poor found that if there were a small amount of material around the Sun, this would fully explain the 43 seconds. In addition, this gave exactly the same deflection results that relativists were looking for in the eclipse experiments. Thus, this one assumption solved 2 problems without using relativity. Secondly, the small bulge of the Sun's equator causes this precession almost exactly. Thirdly, in 1898, Gerber accounted for the precession by assuming that gravity propagated at the speed of light. And fourthly, Moon, using the mass of the stars, known as Mach's principle, also obtained the same result as Einstein. Even today, relativists claim that only relativity can explain certain observed phenomena, and therefore it confirms that relativity is true. But, in every case, there is a classical explanation that is never referred to and receives little or no publicity. So relativists continue in their self-contained world of continual denial of alternative explanations. In 1859, Fizeau found that light was deflected by flowing water. Einstein claimed, yet again, that the classical explanation does not in the least diminish the conclusiveness of the experiment as a crucial test in favour of the theory of relativity. Poor's comments upon this statement are scathing. These 2 sentences should be read and reread. How can an experiment equally well explained by several different theories be a crucial test in favour of one of them? Einstein's claim is typical of relativists' arrogance. Muons. These are short-life, high-velocity particles that should have disintegrated before they reached the Earth's surface. As relativity predicts that moving clocks are slower, this is held as a further proof. But Setterfield and Barnes have shown, independent of relativity, that their life can be longer due to their speed. In addition, the Earth can be considered as rushing towards them, according to relativity theory, and we have the same contradiction as in the clock's paradox. Contrary experiments. Michelson-Morley and Miller. We have shown how the Michelson-Morley null result was the real reason why Einstein abolished the ether. But it was not a null result, for speeds of up to 10 kilometers per second were recorded by Miller, who continued with a similar apparatus, studying these results for the rest of his life. These results greatly troubled Einstein, because if there were no ether, they should have all been 0. Shankland, who had worked with Miller, had an interview with Einstein, which greatly enhanced his prestige. After Miller's death, he wrote an article very critical of Miller's experiments, claiming that his positive results were due to his inadequate control of the temperature of the arms, which was completely false. He went on to rise to high positions in his profession. Sagnac. Sagnac passed a light both ways around a revolving table and found that the fringe changes corresponded with the speed of rotation. This proved that there was an ether, contradicting relativity. The light was travelling through the ether at a fixed rate. The mirrors, going with or against the direction of the light, gave the interference fringe changes he recorded. Modern laser compasses use this effect today. To deny that the ether exists is nonsense. Einstein. What sort of a man was he? Mileva. His first wife, Mileva, bore him an illegitimate daughter, which Einstein immediately had adopted without ever seeing the child. It is thought that Mileva, a bright student, may have been the brains behind relativity, because after she left him taking their 2 boys, he never made any further notable advances in physics for the rest of his life. He also gave her the full amount of his Nobel Prize. Was this hush money? Was Einstein a plagiarist? He, first of all, rediscovered Lorentz's 1904 transformations. Secondly, he developed statistical mechanics and molecular kinetic theory, unaware of Boltzmann and Gibbs' major treatise. Thirdly, Poincaré worked on relativity and Brownian motion, 2 subjects that Einstein later became famous for. Was there a mole in Poincaré's staff? 4. Mandel told Einstein that one of his papers was not new, as it was all found in a paper by Klein. Fifthly, Einstein, having seen a paper by de Broglie, referred to the contents in a lecture in September 1924, 2 months before de Broglie's paper was published, without giving him any credit. The subject was the start of quantum mechanics and wave theory. Pays, Einstein's biographer, says he was the godfather of wave mechanics. And finally, E equals mc squared. Einstein did not discover this formula. Poincaré had been working on mass, energy, light and relativity and submitted his paper on the 5th of June 1905. Einstein submitted his paper on the 30th of June 1905. Did he know of Poincaré's paper anyway? It is Einstein's paper that received all the publicity. The link between E, M and C was well known by many physicists in 1905 and is embedded in Maxwell's equations. In fact, the power of the atom and that it was related to the square of the speed of light was noted in a paper by Preston as early as 1875. Nevertheless, Einstein has always been credited with the discovery of E equals mc squared. That this formula is correct has absolutely nothing to do with relativity, yet it is implied that because it is true and the atom bomb works, then relativity must be true, which is nonsense. Comments by scientists. Rutherford treated the theory as a joke. He walked out of the 1919 eclipse meeting immediately after the president's introduction. When asked why no Anglo-Saxon understood relativity, he replied, "No, they have too much sense." Soddy considered it a swindle. Sir Oliver Lodge, Max Born, Ernest Mach, Poincaré, Pauli, Poor and Lorentz all rejected the theory. Ashton points out that in 2 separate papers, Einstein contradicts himself. In one, he suggests that slow acceleration of the electron may not give off energy. But what is the border speed between giving off energy and not? Professor Dingle initially lectured on relativity, but began to question the theory, particularly the clock paradox. He began seeking answers, but found that he was shunned by former friends and colleagues. Failing to get a hearing, he wrote Science at the Crossroads, in which he realized that science had departed from its pursuit of truth. Professor Essen was so persistently critical of relativity that he was warned by those in power that his promotion prospects and therefore his pension were threatened. He is not the only one to find that opposition to relativity and evolution can damage your career prospects. Today, so accepted is the theory that few are prepared to risk their careers by criticizing it. Relativists and evolutionists dominate the mass media, and criticisms thereby are muted and ignored. The anti-Christian modern propaganda. The question that must be addressed is, Why should anyone want to impose relativity upon the scientific community, knowing it to be false? To answer this, we have to take a broad view of modern concepts, of which relativity is but one, and it becomes obvious that they are all fundamentally anti-Christian. 1. Lyell deliberately set out to destroy the Mosaic account of creation and the flood by presenting false evidence of strata taking millions of years to be laid down. 2. Darwin and his successors claimed that all life evolved by chance, and that man was only a clever ape, not a creation of God for a purpose. He also prepared people to accept huge changes as part of the process of evolution. Freud swept aside any sense of guilt and allowed people to blame their parents or their circumstances for their sins. Marx, ignoring the existence of man's original sin, beguiled millions by promising a heaven on earth, but drew them into a cruel slavery controlled by an elite. 5. Postmodernism says that there is no absolute certainty or truth in life. Every person's view of life is as valid as everyone else's. And 6. Einstein said, there is no centre of stability. Each unit, i.e. person, is on its own. It also enabled theoreticians to dictate how scientists should interpret their cosmological experiments. All these intelligent and educated men are unwittingly playing the part of Lenin's useful idiots in Satan's warfare against God's people. The Christian replies. 1. The earth is about 6,000 years old, and the fossils were all laid down in one worldwide flood, as set out in the Bible. 2. There is no evidence of one species evolving into a completely different species. God created them in major groups that could only vary within a limited range. Man was God's special creation in his image. 3. Freud tried to remove any sense of guilt from man, but we still all instinctively know that we are rebels against a holy God. 4. Marx tried to crush the church, but Christians looked not for a heaven on earth, but to that true heaven in eternity. 5. There is ultimate truth as revealed in the Bible. All men will finally be judged by these standards that he has set before us. And 6. This earth is at the centre of God's interest, because it is the only place where he has placed life and man, his special creation. Therefore he has made it the centre of the universe, for it is only on this planet that he is playing out what I call the drama of the universe, and nowhere else. And finally, a thought for the viewer. Only in the Christian faith can man find peace with God, stability, significance, and security, despite an increasingly chaotic and dangerous world. Christ claimed to be God, so he was either mad, bad, or God. What is your decision?